Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us today, and welcome to our session on how to get published in academic journals. My name is Kira and I'll be moderating today's session. I'll shortly hand you over to my colleague Sophia, who is an Associate Journals Publishing Manager in the Social Sciences and Humanities team at Wiley and is our presenter today. If you have any questions during the presentation, please put them into the Q&A tab and we will answer as many as we can at the end of the session. If you don't get to your question, we will review them afterwards and get back in contact with you by email. This session is recorded and a recording will be emailed to you within the next few days, along with your certificate of attendance. So I'll now hand over to Sophia to get started.
Great, thank you. So hi everyone and welcome. So today we're going to cover how to get published in academic journals, where I'll be providing an overview of the publishing process. As Kira said, my name is Sophia and I'm your presenter for today. So in today's session, we're going to focus on 4 different sections. So we're going to start off by thinking about what you need to think about before publication, then at submission and after publication. And we'll also dedicate some time at the end to focus on the open access publishing landscape in 2022. So the first question that we're going to ask ourselves is, why should you be publishing your work? There are many reasons as to why you should do so. But here in front of you, I've listed 3 very important reasons. So first of all, I'd say recognition is key. You want to receive acknowledgement by your peers of your contributions to the world of research. The second most important thing I would say is career development. By publishing your work, it will lead to research funding, to grant applications, to promotions. So, publish your work so then you can progress in your career. And the last reason I would say is responsibility. And I think this is probably one of the most important reasons, because it is only by publishing your work that you're contributing to scientific research. So we have a responsibility to our societies and to our institutions to share your work as much as we can. So, as I said, for the first part of the session, we'll be focusing on before publication. So thinking about a lot of elements before you even publish. So we'll be covering things such as writing your article, finding the right place for you to publish, and we'll also be looking at what you're trying to achieve through your research. So the first thing that we need to ask ourselves is, what are you writing? And you need to think about this before you start writing. You need to think about this while you're writing and even after you've finished writing. So obviously now we're going to focus on what you need to be thinking about before you start writing. And here in front of you, I have 4 tips that I think would help you with that. So first of all, I would say the first question that we need to ask ourselves is, what type of article are you writing? So is it an original article? Is it a review? Is it a case study? The second thing that we need to think about is your audience. So who are you writing for? Who would find your article the most useful? So are you writing for academics? Are you writing for policymakers? The third thing, which I think is the most important, is what will make this publication successful for you? So think about what kind of impact you want to have. Do you want to have a high number of citations? Do you want to have a strong presence of social media? And finally, I would say be self-aware. So this means look at your research and be mindful and think about what you're writing and whether it is right for journal publishing, or maybe whether it's right for some new form of media. So for example, maybe a blog post. So maybe a blog post. So there are a lot of things to consider before you start writing, and I'll definitely keep referencing these throughout the presentation. So you're thinking about your research. The next thing that you need to do is think about which journals you could potentially submit your research to. This is important to do even before you start writing your research. So you're probably thinking, how do I generate a potential list of journals? There are different ways that you can do so. So first of all, I'd say think about where you read your research and think about where those papers are published. It will give you an idea of what kind of journals you could potentially publish in. think about what research maybe you have written in the past. What journals have you cited in, what papers have you cited in your research? Where are they published? I would also suggest talking to your peers and seeing if they have any recommendations as to where potentially you could publish. And also talk to your boss, talk to your supervisor, and also look at, for example, what they've published and where they published. So these are a few ideas for you to have a little look, have a little research, and see potentially what journals you could select to publish in. Most publishers these days will have a tool that will enable you to find journals. So here in front of you, I have the tool that we use at Wiley, which is the Journal Finder tool, and it's very simple to use. And the way that you use it is that you type in your keywords that are from your research, and the tool will generate a list of potential titles. As I said, a lot of publishers have these tools, so do make the most of them. If you feel as though the Journal Finder tool hasn't found the journals that you're particularly interested in, there are also blog sites or specialist subject area sites that can also maybe help you find a potential other list of journals that you might not have been aware of. So you're thinking about your research, you're thinking about those journals. There are other considerations that we need to be making in terms of that. So at this point, you need to start thinking about what's important to you and also what's important to the journals that you have selected. So the first thing I would say is that you need to research the aims and scopes of the journals that you're interested in submitting your research to. And the reason why this is important is because you need to ensure that your research, your research's aims align with the aims of that particular journal. I would also say that another useful tip is to review the publication timescales of the journals that you're interested in, because if you're wanting to get your submission published in 6 months' time, don't choose a journal that will take potentially a year or 2 years. So definitely review publication timescales. I would also suggest looking at the quality of the papers and also the likelihood of acceptance. We all would like to get published in the best possible journal in our subject area, but what is the likelihood of that happening? I would also suggest looking at the content types of those journals and to see whether it aligns with your research. There are also other considerations that are important to make when selecting a journal. So first I would say, think about impact. Does a journal receive a high number of citations? Think about promotion. Does this journal have a strong presence on social media? Are there possibilities for you to share your content? And also think about accessibility. So does this journal have open access options? So as you can see, there are a lot of different considerations that need to be made in order to choose a journal to submit to. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier in terms of what you need to be thinking about when you're submitting. You need to be thinking about your audience, you need to be thinking about your topic, you need to be thinking about your content type. So for the next part, we'll be focusing on the structure of a research article. So in front of you, I have added the structure, and it's a basic structure of what most research articles will look like, but this will vary depending on subject area. So you start off with your title and your abstract. It is then followed by your introduction and your method experimental section. And then you have your results and discussion, which is followed by your conclusion, your references and acknowledgements. As you can see at the bottom of the slide, I've added in big, bold letters, read all this author submission guidelines. And the reason why this is in capitals and it's bold is because it's a very, very important thing to do. So you need to ensure that you always read the author guidelines for a specific journal, because they will give you more information on the structure of the research article. So now we're going to be talking about titles, and the reason why we talk about titles is because they are extremely important. Once your paper has been submitted, and published, you can no longer change your title. So we do need to think about this before you submit your paper. Titles are important because it's also the first thing that anyone will read, and this is, an editor, it's a reviewer, a potential reader. So we need to ensure that we get this right from the get-go. So the question we're going to ask ourselves now is, what makes a good research article? So the first bit of advice that I would give is try to keep the title as short as possible. So typically this will be between 10 to 20 substantial words. Obviously, this does vary across subject area because there might be specific technical language that needs to be included in the title, but the general rule of thumb is to keep it as short as you possibly can. The second bit of advice that I would give is to use those keywords, put them up front and optimize them, and ensure that you state your key findings in your title. Another important thing to do is make sure that you are using current terminology that is related to your field. The final point I would say is probably the most important, which is stimulate reader interest. Make your title as eye-catching as you possibly can so that people will be drawn to read the article. Whenever I have a moment myself to read articles that we publish at Wiley, I always choose an article based on the title. So if the title is really good, it will entice me to go and read the full article. So definitely recommend making that title as eye-catching as you possibly can. So for the next part, we'll be talking about your abstract. And the reason why we also talk about the abstract is because the title and the abstract are both very, very important, because it's the first thing that anyone will see when they see your paper. So definitely make sure that you put something important and new at the beginning. Don't make the middle part longer than necessary, and also place the insights in context of future prospects. As you can see from the screenshot in front of you, there are some words that have been highlighted throughout the title and the abstract, and you'll probably notice that those words are quite repetitive. That's because those are your key words, and so advice that we give is to try and repeat those keywords between 3 to 6 times, because it will be beneficial for you, because it will enhance people finding your research through search engine optimization, and we will be discussing that in more detail later on. So now we're going to talk about references, and the reason why we talk about references is because more mistakes are found in this part of the paper than any other section. So we need to ensure that we reference all our papers correctly, and it's ethically required to do so. So if you're ever unsure about adding a reference in, just put it in, and it can be removed later on. But the general rule of thumb is to put those references in. Make sure that you cite all of your papers and that all your citations are relevant. In terms of don'ts, the general advice that we give is try to avoid self-citation as much as possible. So if you have published lots of papers before, don't excessively self-cite in your new paper. And also we encourage you to avoid citing too many publications from a single area, because most journals these days are international. So as I mentioned before, there is an importance behind talking about search engine optimization. And the reason why this is important, as you probably already know, the way that we search for content these days is through search engines such as Google. And the way that these work is that they analyze those words that are freely available, and then they pull content based on, for example, in relation to academic research, they'll pull content based off your titles and your abstracts, and more importantly, based off of those keywords that you have added and repeated throughout your title and your abstract. So the reason why we talk about this is because it's incredibly important to think about this before you even submit your paper. Think about the future of your paper. Do you want it to be on the first page of Google, on the second page of Google? So the way that you're going to enhance it is actually by using those keywords and repeating them. So definitely think about this before submitting, because once the paper has been published, you can no longer change it. So a lot of people on this call might be thinking, how does one get published when English is not your primary language? The first thing that I wanted to say is that English is the predominant language in academic publishing. So there is there is an expectation for you to write and publish in English. We do have some tips to help you with that. So the first thing that I would say is read widely and as much as you possibly can. I would say, if you're interested in a specific subject area and a specific topic, try and read a lot of content to do with that, and so that you can familiarize yourself with the language that you're planning on writing your research in. I would also say try to keep your language as clear and simple as possible. Don't overcomplicate it. I would also say make a note of the preferred terminology for a specific journal, and definitely make use of repositories to help you find the correct terminology. Using a translation service is always incredibly useful. So definitely look at what publishers have on offer and see if that could potentially help you have more confidence when you are planning on submitting your paper. But the last thing I want to say is that nowadays more and more journals are publishing content in other languages. So if you would like to maybe publish your full article or your abstract in your preferred language, check this with the editor, because more and more these days it is happening. So there are other things that we need to consider also before submission. An important thing to talk about is plagiarism. So most journals these days use a plagiarism checking tool, and the one that is primarily used is Authenticate. And basically this tool will screen new submissions against published papers, and it will pick up on those text matches. So if it's a phrase or if it's the odd sentence, it's fine. But if there is an entire paragraph, if it picks up an entire paragraph, then that could potentially be problematic. We also like to talk about self-plagiarism in these sessions, because people might think that it's not an issue, but it is, because if you're reusing text from papers that you've published before, then it will be problematic. So again, going back to those references, just make sure that you're referencing everything properly and that you're not plagiarizing your text. So you have thought about everything that's important to you. So you have thought about your research, you've got a potential list of titles that you're planning on submitting to, you've got your title and your abstract, and you've put all of those keywords in so that you've enhanced your you've optimized your search engine, and you've referenced your paper well. So you're now ready for submission. So for the next part of the session, we'll be looking at the submission process, and we're also going to be looking at the peer review process. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is author guidelines. And the reason why I want to talk about author guidelines is because they are extremely important. So always make sure you read the author guidelines before you submit your paper, because in the author guidelines, you will be able to see the format, you will be able to see the length, it will give you information on figures and tables, it will let you know if you need to write a cover letter or if there are any open research requirements. So definitely make sure that you always read the author guidelines before you submit. As you can see from the screenshot in front of you, the author guidelines are clearly labeled on journal websites. So do read through them when you submit. People might think that author guidelines are not necessarily important to read, but sometimes papers are submitted and they are in an incorrect format, they are too long, and then this means that you fall at the first hurdle and your paper gets rejected. So definitely format your paper alongside the author guidelines. I also wanted to mention that a lot of journals now offer free format submission, and this is an initiative that was started a few years ago, and it enables researchers to submit their paper in any format they like, as long as the paper is readable. You will only know if a journal offers free format submission by reading the author guidelines. That is the only way. So again, read those author guidelines so you get all of the information, and then you can submit your paper. So now we're going to be talking about the process of submitting your manuscript. So typically journals will have an electronic editorial office through which you will submit your paper. And at Wiley, the majority of our journals use an EEO that is called Scholar One manuscripts. And as you can see, there is a screenshot here in front of you. So the way that you use it is quite simple. From the journal homepage, there will be a link that will take you directly through to the ScholarOne journal page. You can create an account, so you have your user ID and you have your password. And as you can see, one of the requirements at submission is for you to have an Orcid ID. An Orcid ID is a free and unique identifier, and the purpose of it is that it distinguishes you from other researchers, but more importantly, it connects you to your research. So this makes things such as keeping track of your submission a lot easier. Your Orcid profile is visible to all, and the great thing about it is that you can gain recognition of your work quite widely. It's quite simple to set up an Orcid ID. It only takes 30 seconds, so I definitely encourage everyone to get one as soon as you can. So for the next part, we'll be talking about peer review. And the reason why we talk about peer review is because it's very important in the publishing process, but specifically extremely important when it comes to submissions. So what is peer review? Peer review is the evaluation of your work that is done by your colleagues, by your peers. And the point of peer review is that they assess the suitability of your paper for publication. So this means that peer reviewers ask themselves questions such as, is this research true? Is it relevant? Has it been communicated well? Is there any plagiarism? The purpose of peer reviewers is to verify and improve your research. And they do so by looking at the interpretation of your results. They look at your reasoning and presentation, and they will offer critical but constructive feedback to any new ideas that you have submitted. So here in front of you, I have an overview of what the peer review process looks like. I just want to state that this is not the same across all journals. It does change from journal to journal, but hopefully this will provide you with an overview of what to expect during the process. So an author submits their article, and the article is immediately assessed by the editor. So at this point, it could go either two ways. The paper could be desk rejected, and at this point, you could potentially follow up with the editor to get some feedback. But normally, a paper that is desk rejected would probably mean that it doesn't fit with the aims and scopes of the journal. Instead, if the author thinks that your paper has merit, it will be sent off to the reviewers. Different journals have different forms of peer review. Some offer transparent peer review, some have single blind peer review, double or triple. The one that is most commonly used across journals is double blind peer review, and this is where the author and the reviewer identity is not revealed. So the reviewers assess your submission, and they send their comments back to the editor. And again, at this point, it could go a few different ways. So your paper could be rejected. The editor might decide that another review is needed, or the editor might decide that it's a good submission, but there are a few revisions that are required. So in this case, the editor will send back the paper to the author. The author will make those changes, and then we'll go through the process again. So I just want to clarify and state that very few papers get accepted unconditionally with no comments. So if you've made it this far, there probably will be some changes that will be required. So once your paper has been accepted, it will then go through to production, and then it will go through to publication. As I said before, and I'll state this again, the number one reason a paper is desk rejected, and this is according to editors, is because the paper doesn't fit with the aims and scopes of that particular journal. So this is why we say to our researchers, before submission, look at the aims and scopes of each journal that you're interested in and see whether your paper fits in with the aims of that particular journal. So here at Wiley, we want to offer you some tips on how to survive peer review. We understand that it's quite a difficult process to go through, and it's very difficult to have people read your work, to say that to say that it needs changes and that the comments made. But you have to understand that peer review is an important part of the process, and it's necessary. So learn to accept feedback as a learning experience, because editors and reviewers are trying to help you improve your paper. That's all they want to do. As I said earlier, very few submissions are accepted unconditionally. So if your paper has comments, then it's a fairly normal part of the process. If you feel as though you need help with your language and statistics, definitely seek help with that, and publishers do offer services that can help with that. And remember that persistence pays. So answer those questions promptly, address those revisions quickly, because it will get you a step closer to where you want to be. And the final thing that we want to say is celebrate your accomplishments, because as I said before, going through the peer review process can be challenging, it can be difficult, but celebrate each step because it's a great accomplishment, and you will be one step closer to being published. So today I'm also going to talk about journal transfer networks, and the reason why we want to talk about this is because many journals have a transfer system in place with a sister journal. I'll explain the process a bit for you now. So here we have Journal A and Journal B. So an author submits a manuscript to Journal A, and the editor will evaluate the submission. And if they think that the paper is good, but it doesn't fit with the aims and scopes of Journal A, they will think, okay, I will reject it and transfer it over to the sister journal, which is Journal B. The author has the ultimate say. I just want to point out, no paper gets transferred over to another journal without the author's consent. So the author would decide if they want to be transferred over, and it will go over to Journal B. The purpose of these networks and of these transfers is that it enables authors to have a second opportunity at having editors and reviewers look at your research. It's not guaranteed that Journal B will publish your paper. It's simply reducing that time that is spent reformatting your submission to then be submitted elsewhere. So it's definitely worth looking into whether a journal does have a transfer system in place with another journal, because it will just give you that extra possibility at having your journal, having your research evaluated and potentially published. So your paper has been accepted, it has been sent to production, and it's now booked in. So at this point, the production editor will take over the coordination of your publication. Here in front of you is an overview of what the production process looks like. Again, I just want to say that it won't be the same workflow process as across all journals, but this again will give you an overview of what to expect during the production process. So the production editor will send your submission over through to copy editing, then typesetting, then HTML and PDF proofs will be created, then they'll be revised to proof and typesetting again, and then the PE will perform a final check of everything, and then the article will be published online, which is really exciting. So we do have some tips that we'd like to give in relation to the production process. So first of all, I'd say is the most important is do check your proofs, because you mustn't assume that everything is absolutely fine. The production process is run by humans, and humans can make mistakes. So the advice that we give is go through your research with a fine-tooth comb. The other thing that I'd like to say is be mindful of turnaround time. So the quicker you get back to production, the quicker it will speed up the process, and your research will be published as soon as possible. And the last thing I wanted to say is that articles rarely go straight into an issue. These days, the articles are published online. And at Wiley, we call this early view, but different publishers have different names for it. But the great thing is that your article has been published, and it's really exciting and great. So we've talked about what you need to do before publication, at submission, and now we're going to focus on after publication. And the reason why we need to talk about after publication is because you need to keep thinking about your research and what you're trying to achieve with your research. You need to think about promotion, and you need to think about impact. So the first thing I would say is think about maximizing your impact. So here in front of you, we have some tips on what, on how to help you with that. So number one, we have set yourself up for success. And actually this you will have already done before writing your research. So this means you will have created an Orcid ID. This means that you will have put in those keywords in your title and your abstract so that you have optimized your search engine so that people can find your paper. So this you will have already done, which is really great. The second thing that I would suggest is share your paper wherever and whenever you can. Publishing your paper is such a great achievement, so share it on social media, speak to the publishers and see what kind of content sharing services they have. I would also say make sure that you update your institutional profile with your latest publication. The next thing I would say is talk about your research a lot. As I said before, it's a great accomplishment, so you need to talk about it whenever you can. So whether you are at a networking event, whether you're attending a conference, it could be virtual, could be in real life. If you're presenting at a conference, use all of these moments to try and talk about your research and let people, tell people about it and let them know about it. The final thing that I was going to say is that content is king, and so this means that you need to think about ways that you can create links to drive people towards your work. So for example, you can create a lay summary, you can create a graphical abstract or an infographic, anything that is going to sort of maximize the impact of your research. So there are other ways to also maximize the impact of your research. So we've talked about SEOs, you will have already done that. We just spoke about conferences, so definitely make the most of talking about your research at conferences. Publicity is also key. So think about your research and ask yourself, is this research newsworthy? If it is, flag it to your to your publisher's PR department, to your institutional PR department. Networking, we spoke about this, so join any academic networking events and talk about your research. If you run a blog, then post about your article. Also, in terms of the wider web, you will have already created your Orcid ID, and as we mentioned before, a good thing to do is update your professional website with your article. Think about multimedia, so create a short video, as we said, or a podcast that conveys the message of the essence of your paper, so that you're talking directly to your potential readers. Another great thing to do is to add a link to your email signature. That is, it's a very simple thing to do, but anytime you send an email, people will be able to see the article that you've written there. I would also say look at article sharing services that your publisher has. So for example, here at Wiley, we have Wiley Author Services, and you can use those services to nominate 10 colleagues that will receive your paper free access for them to read. And finally, social media. It's a great platform these days to share your work. So definitely use platforms such as LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook, and also engage with the journal Twitter accounts or society or college accounts. All of this is very, very helpful. And again, it's offering you different ways for you to think about what can I try to achieve with my research? How can I get everyone to read it? And so just keep in mind ways that you can maximize the impact of your published work. So we've now reached the final part of the session where we will be focusing on open access in 2022. And the reason why we like to talk about open access is because there is generally there is a lack of knowledge or maybe not as much information out there for researchers. So it's good to talk about it because it's one of the biggest developments in the publishing landscape. Today I won't offer an in-depth analysis of open access, but I'm here to provide you an overview so that you can familiarize yourselves with the terminology that we're using in relation to open access. So the first question that we're going to ask ourselves is, what is open access? So there are three key things that you need to remember in relation to this. So Open access means that it's online, it's free, and then it can be reused or reproduced anywhere. There are lots of different types of open access, but the two that we're here to talk about today are green open access and gold open access. So we're going to start with green. So green OA is one of the most popular, and this is where the author self-archives a version of the article in an online repository, and this could be an institutional repository. The important thing to remember about green open access is that there is no cost associated with it. The self-archiving requirements can depend on the article version, but authors may archive the submitted version on acceptance or the accepted version with a 12 to 24-month embargo. And again, the embargo periods do vary by journal and also by subject area. And a standard CTA and ELA license are used. Instead, gold open access is probably the one that we're referring to when we talk about, when you hear the term open access. So with gold OA, the author pays an article publication charge, an APC, and this means that the article is made freely available, so people can read it, they can download it, and they can share it. So with gold open access, the APCs, so the article publication charges, can vary depending on the journal, but these will be listed on journal web pages. So if you are interested in publishing gold OA, then do check this out. Wiley offers two different ways for you to publish gold open access. So we either have fully open access journals or we have subscription journals. So the fully open access journals are journals where every article is published open access. Subscription journals instead are journals that publish regular articles alongside open access articles, but the open access is given as an option for journals to authors to select. A Creative Commons license is used in relation to this. There are different types of Creative Commons licenses, but the general idea is that they will allow you to reproduce your work anywhere. So for the next part of the session, we will be talking about transitional agreements. And the reason why we talk about transitional agreements in these sessions is because they are the latest and biggest development in the open access publishing landscape. So what is a transitional agreement? So a transitional agreement is a contract that is negotiated between institutions and publishers that transitions a business model over a period of time from one that is subscription-based to one in which publishers are paid for their open access publishing services. This enables institutions, researchers, and publishers to transition to a more open future in a more sustainable way. The way that they work is quite simple. There is either a read and publish or a publish and read deal, but basically the money that is paid in these agreements is to publish in the journals. There are lots of different agreements worldwide. This is something that a lot of publishers have in place, not just Wiley. And obviously, I'm here to talk to you about the agreements that Wiley has in place. So here on the next slide, I have the transition agreements that Wiley has. So as you can see, Wiley has 24 of these agreements. We have so many that they are currently on 2 slides. So in the ones in front of you, we have the transitional agreements that are based in Europe. So for example, we have the Netherlands, we have Austria, we have Germany, we have Italy, Spain. We also have deals across Scandinavia. So we have Norway, we have Sweden and Finland, and then there's other places such as the UK and Switzerland and so on. And in the next page, as you can see, we have various agreements in North America, and they are growing, as you can see. And more recently, we've had agreements in Australia, New Zealand, and Israel, and the Republic of Korea. So the thing to remember with these agreements is that if you are a researcher that is based at one of these institutions, you have access to all of the content for free. But most importantly, if you are wanting to publish your research and you are based at one of these institutions, you can publish your article Gold OA, and the cost is covered by the transitional agreement. So the cost is not placed on the author. So the reason we talk about these agreements is because it's another way for you to get your research published open access, should you want that. And again, it goes back to thinking about, what kind of impact do you want to have with your research? Do you want to have your research open? Do you want people to access it? So, as you can see, there are a lot of different considerations to be making when you are when you're planning on writing your research, when you're submitting your research, and even after you've finished writing it. So I would like to thank you for listening to me today. I hope that everything that I covered was useful, and I'm happy to take any questions now. Thank you.
Thanks, Sophia. Okay, so first question we had is, can I submit the same article to different journals at the same time on the basis that it might be accepted in one journal but not the other?
Okay, thank you for that. So you cannot submit the same paper to multiple journals. You have to submit only to one. And the reason as to why you have to do this is because you're committed to that particular journal. So focus on the one journal to submit to, and wait for the process to happen. Get that submission in, let the editors review it, let the peer review process happen. Should your article then be rejected, then that's the time that you start thinking about. So first of all, look at those rejections, see if you can make those changes to your research. I would then say that if you no longer want to, submit to the same journal again, you can then try another journal, but definitely try and incorporate as many of those revisions in as you possibly can. And as I said before, bear in mind that if your paper has been rejected, do properly research the aims and scopes of that journal. Do read those author guidelines and figure out, potentially why your paper has been rejected. Get your supervisors or peers to read it, and then submit to another journal. So essentially, the answer is you can only submit to one at a time. So just one.
Okay, thank you. Another question on how might the structure of an article differ for a humanities subject like art history or English, where methods are not so relevant?
Well, in that case as well, the best place to find out that information is on the author guidelines, because, as you said, for a social sciences and humanities article, the method experimental section will not be relevant. So definitely look at the author guidelines, because they will give you information on the structure of your article. They will give you information on whether it needs to be formatted in a certain way. It will also, as I said earlier, it will give you more information on any kind of initiatives that are going on. So, for example, as I mentioned earlier, with the free format submission, it will give you the information there. So you need to do all of this research and look into this before you, before you write and before you submit your paper. And do bear in mind that it's, if it is you're interested in the social sciences and humanities, you must look at the guidelines for each and every journal across the humanities subjects, because the guidelines could vary, the structures could vary. So I'd say keep in mind that to look at the guidelines and see what is required of you for your submission.
Hi, sorry, can I just jump in there?
Yeah.
Hi, this is everybody. This is Lizzie. I'm a publisher at Wiley as well. The other thing I would just add to that is, instead of methods, think of theoretical backgrounds. Think of kind of approaches. Is it, are you taking a traditionalist perspective? Are you taking a if I was in archaeology, a post-processual perspective on the kind of research that you're doing? Methods is to think of the term methods as just applying to I added X amount of water and etc. to a paper is very literal. By methods, we're kind of talking about, you know, what is the framework behind your article? You know, what is it that you're applying? What is it that you're doing? You know, what approach are you taking to this research?
Thank you, Lizzie.
Okay. Also linked to the writing of the paper, is there a recommended number of words for the abstract and contents?
So I would say that, again, this can depend on subject area. This can change and can vary across journals and subjects. So I would say if you're unsure, maybe look at those journals that you're interested in. Look at specifically that subject area. You know, how long those abstracts are, because again, it can vary quite a lot. So for you to potentially get a general idea, one of my recommendation would be to look at those journals and look at those abstracts and see and get a feel for for the length of the abstract and how long it should be, and also, as I mentioned before, those keywords are important. Look at that within the abstracts and the titles. So I think that's the advice that I would give.
Thank you. Question on how does someone get on? Oh.
Hello?
Oh, sorry, I thought someone else was going to talk, so I wondered. That's fine. Okay. How can someone get an Orcid number, an Orcid ID? That is, isn't it?
It's very simple. We can post a link in the chat afterwards, or you can email me if you want to. I can add my email in the chat after the call. But simply you have to follow the link, and it will take you to the page where you will register for an Orcid ID. And as I said, it's quite a very fast process. It takes about, I think it took me 30 seconds to register for one. And so if I can post a link afterwards and get that to you, so you can register.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just reading through the questions to find another one. Question around green open access and what is self-archiving?
So is that the question?
Yeah, that is the question. What is self-archiving? So
it's when you basically upload your manuscript in an online repository. Lizzie, I don't know if you might be able to give more information about that.
Yeah, so when we talk about self-archiving, we're talking about usually you uploading the submitted version of the article to a repository or potentially your own website or something of that nature. This is that's quite standard. This might also, I mean, for a lot of subjects, particularly in the STEM area, there are of course preprints where people post articles that haven't been accepted or published yet. So it's kind of in a similar vein to that. So that is what kind of self-archiving is on there. It links to kind of the green route, and so that's when you can make your article more easily available after a certain embargo period, which is usually between 12 to 24 months. This will be clearly stated on the copyright license you sign for any publisher. So Wiley Author Services, which you can see the website too on this page. If you go into there, there's a lot more information about kind of self-archiving and green open access, which can kind of help you figure out what is relevant for your article and your situation.
Great, thanks. And the question around the writing and publishing an article process? Like, how long does the process usually take? I mean, is there an average, I suppose?
Okay, so this is what from submission to publication, I'm guessing. So again, this can vary quite a lot depending on the journal. It can take a few months, it can take up to a year. It really does depend, because, so for example, even the peer review process alone can take a few months, and the reason why it can take so long is also because there is a lack of reviewers, and editors are always trying to find as many reviewers as they possibly can for a submission. So that can sometimes take a long time to do that. And in fact, I was going to say that you know, since we have early career researchers here, a good opportunity for you also to familiarize yourself with the publishing process would be to become a reviewer potentially for a journal. So it's definitely something worth looking into. And also, so sorry, going back to the question, it varies. It can vary quite a lot. It can also, you know, vary depending on maybe the submission platforms that a journal is using, on the production. Production also can depend. Everything is, you know, as I mentioned earlier, the peer review process and with production, it relies on humans. So, you know, even for researchers, you need to ensure that you're replying to editors and to production promptly, so that you can get your research published as soon as possible. So I think essentially there's a lot of different factors that are important to consider, and it does vary from journal to journal. I would recommend, as I said earlier, looking at the turnaround times for a journal. There will be an average provided. So it's definite. So for example, if you do want your research published quicker, go look for a journal that offers that possibility. So definitely look into the turnaround times before you submit to a journal.
Thank you, Sophia. So I think we've probably got time for maybe one or two more questions before that time. Does the copyright remain with an author when they publish open access?
Lizzie, would you be able to take this?
Yeah, so technically, yeah, so really, if you publish gold open access, and that's what we're talking about here, technically, in many ways, there isn't really any copyright. So when you publish gold open access with a Creative Commons BY license, it can be reused and reposted anywhere in any way, as long as there is kind of citation to the original article. Technically, the copyright stays with you as the author, but from a kind of a practical perspective, there's very little that you could do to stop it being reused, unless it was in some kind of libelous way, essentially. There are other Creative Commons licenses which provide some restrictions around this. So Creative Commons, so there are ones that are around kind of commercial, so Creative Commons non-commercial, which means it cannot be kind of used for commercial purposes. That's quite obvious. There are ones in which it can't be, it can be posted anywhere, but it can't be altered, where, there are things like that. You would need to, and basically, the best thing you can do is kind of, again, go to the various sites. There's a lot of them. In fact, even Wikipedia can be quite useful for this. And it will tell you what the different Creative Commons licenses cover. And it's also very important to be aware of if any funding has requirements. A lot of funders now do have requirements around which Creative Commons license must be used in relation to open access. It's usually a full CC BY or one of the other, or one of the others. So that's kind of the answer around copyright. Technically, it is with you, but in actuality, the article, the images, the data, anything that's in that article can be reproduced, reused, amended, etc., kind of anywhere.
Thank you. Probably the last question, probably time for the last one. Should someone address all reviewers' comments when they revise their paper, and what do you do if there's a conflicting between reviewers?
Okay, so I think it's always important to address all comments that are made by reviewers, because the purpose of the peer review process and of peer reviewers is to, they want to help you improve your research, and get it published. If you feel as though there is sort of a conflict, of interest or conflict between, two different opinions, a good thing to do is to follow up with the editor. If you feel as though, you don't necessarily know what to do, the editor will always, have the final decision with regards to your paper. So I'd say follow up with the editor, should you wish to do so. I think also, if you're not sure, it's always good to check with peers, with your colleagues, with your supervisors, should you want more information. I think definitely it's just a good opportunity for you to, yes, to talk to your colleagues, talk to your supervisor, and also, speak to the editor if you feel as though, there is conflicting opinions there.
Okay, thank you. Right, so we've got, just seeing there's one more question that we can fit in. Are there any, can you just say something about, is there a most common cause for rejection for a paper?
So I would say that 20% of, 20% of the reason why a paper is rejected will be, it will be desk rejected. So this means that the paper is potentially not in line with the aims and scopes of a particular journal. It could also potentially be because, someone hasn't read the author guidelines and hasn't followed the formatting requirements that are specific to that journal. So that is, potentially the first option. So this is why, as I mentioned in my presentation, you need to really research that journal properly, read everything, read the author guidelines, look at the aims and scopes and see whether it matches with, with the aims of your research. So I'd say 20% is that. 40% of the reason, 40% of rejections will be, will be during the review stage, and it will probably be because of maybe more changes are needed to be made to the research that you have presented. And if you do get rejected, it doesn't mean that that's the end of the road. It's always good to take into consideration, if your rejection comes along with comments, it's good to read through your paper and see if those amendments can be made, and don't see a rejection as discouraging, because it happens quite a lot to everyone. So you can, once you've made those edits and those changes, you can then resubmit to the paper, to the journal that you tried submitting to, or sometimes it's always best to look elsewhere. So I'd say probably those are the reasons as to why.
Great, thank you, Sophia. So we are at time. So just like to thank you very much for the presentation. We've had some great comments and feedback in the questions as well, about how helpful and useful it's been. In the next few days, all attendees, you will receive an email with a copy of the recording of today, and a link so you can download your certificate of attendance. Yes, thank you for your time.
Great, thank you.